There is a grain so nutritionally complete that NASA selected it as one of a handful of crops capable of sustaining human life in space. It contains more protein per gram than beef, more calcium than milk, more iron than spinach. It is the only grain on Earth that supplies all 9 essential amino acids in a single seed. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reviewed every grain crop in the world and concluded it was superior in protein content and quality to every traditional cereal in existence. For 6,500 years, it fed empires. It powered the warriors of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas. Millions of people across 2 continents depended on it as their primary food source. Then, in 1521, a Spanish general ordered every field of it burned. He imposed the death penalty on anyone caught growing it, possessing it, or even saving its seeds. We have been without it ever since. The archive opens in the Tehuacan-Cuicatlan Valley of Mexico, 6.5 millennia before Hernán Cortés was born. The ancestors of the Popoloca people were domesticating crops in thin, dry soil that modern agriculture would consider completely worthless. They were not choosing between good options and better ones. They were choosing between what survived and what did not. In that unforgiving landscape, one plant did something no other crop could. It grew in drought. It grew in heat. It grew in soil so poor it killed wheat. A single plant could produce up to 60,000 seeds. Those seeds could be ground into flour, popped, boiled into porridge, pressed into cakes, fermented into a drink, or eaten raw by the handful. The leaves could be cooked as greens between harvests. Nothing was wasted. Nothing required replanting. Season after season, the exact same field gave back. They called it Huautli. By the time the Aztec Empire rose to dominate Mesoamerica, Huautli ranked alongside maize and beans as one of the 3 primary pillars of civilization. Not a supplement, not a luxury crop, a foundation. In the Nahuatl language, the name cannot be traced to any other root word. It stands entirely alone because the plant stood alone. There was nothing else to compare it to. The Aztec capital received an estimated 20,000 tons of it annually as tribute from 17 conquered provinces. Carriers walked up to 30 miles a day along stone causeways to deliver it. In sheer volume, the tribute nearly equaled that of maize. 200,000 people consumed it during the annual festival of Panquetzalitztli alone. In the exact same era, across the Andes in what is now Peru, the Inca were growing their own variety. They called it kiwicha. Different continent, different civilization, completely independent cultivation. They arrived at the exact same plant through entirely different paths. In the Himalayan regions of India, communities growing it at extreme elevations called it ramdana. The word translates to grain sent by God, not named by a marketing department. Named by the people who had been eating it for generations and understood exactly what it did for them. In the Caribbean, its leaves have been cooked and eaten for centuries under a name that survives in kitchens from Jamaica to Trinidad to this day. They call it callaloo. The name changed as it crossed oceans. The knowledge inside the leaf did not. 4 civilizations, separated by oceans and mountain ranges, converging independently on the very same plant. And they were all correct. The nutrition inside amaranth is not subtle. A single cup of cooked amaranth delivers 9 grams of complete protein, the kind that contains every amino acid your body cannot produce on its own. Beef delivers roughly the same amount per cup, at 10 times the cost in land, water, and energy to produce. Amaranth contains 3 times more calcium, gram for gram, than most grains. It carries more iron than spinach. It is the only grain that provides measurable vitamin C. Its protein structure is so perfectly balanced that researchers described it as the closest plant protein to human breast milk. When the UN called it superior to every traditional cereal, they were not using casual language. That was a formal scientific designation. But there is something else inside amaranth that no other grain contains. A compound called squalene. Squalene is a lipid your liver produces naturally to regulate cholesterol and protect cell membranes. As we age, production slows. The supplement industry sells it in capsules, extracted primarily from shark liver, for $30 to $60 a bottle. The cosmetic industry uses that same shark-derived squalene as a premium moisturizer. Fishing fleets harvest deep-sea sharks specifically to extract it. Amaranth seeds contain the highest concentration of squalene found in any land plant on Earth. It grows it straight from the ground, without harvesting a single shark, and without a single dollar changing hands. The Aztecs did not know the word squalene, but they knew what the plant did, and they built an entire civilization on it. Now pay close attention, because this explains exactly why you have never eaten it. Amaranth was not just food to the Aztecs. It was sacred. During the annual festival of Panquetzalistli, priests ground amaranth seeds with honey, and sometimes with sacrificial blood, into a dough they called tzoali. From this dough, they sculpted figures of the gods. The figures were carried through the streets of the capital, displayed at the great temples, and then broken apart and consumed by tens of thousands of worshippers in a communal act of sacred eating. When Hernán Cortés entered Tenochtitlan in 1519, he watched this ceremony. He was a Catholic. He had been raised on the Eucharist, the central sacrament of his faith, in which bread and wine are consumed as the body and blood of Christ. What he saw looked, to his eyes, disturbingly similar. A grain-based dough, a sculpted figure of a god, a communal consumption of that figure as an act of devotion. Directed toward a god his church considered false. Mixed with blood. The Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún recorded the ceremony in meticulous detail in the Florentine Codex, one of the most comprehensive documents of Aztec civilization ever written. He did not use neutral language. He called the ritual a mockery of the Christian Eucharist. His superiors described it as a diabolical imitation. The spiritual threat was explicitly stated in their own handwriting in a document that still exists in a library in Florence. The conquistadors themselves recorded the reason. The grain had to go because the grain was the ritual, and the ritual was resistance. In the aftermath of the conquest in 1521, Spanish colonial authorities banned the cultivation and ritual use of amaranth. Fields were burned, seed stocks were confiscated and destroyed. Growers faced severe punishment. The ban was not agricultural policy. It was not a food safety concern. It was a deliberate act of cultural erasure, designed to cut the Aztec people off from the material foundation of their spiritual practice. The goal was not just to kill the plant, it was to kill what the plant meant. And in doing so, they eliminated access to the most nutritious grain in the Americas. Hernán Cortés did not just conquer the Aztec Empire, he burned its food supply. And he did it because a grain looked too much like communion. The prohibition was not permanent. In remote mountain villages in Puebla, Morelos, and Oaxaca, families hid seeds. They grew small patches in hidden locations. They passed the knowledge between generations quietly, the way people pass dangerous things when someone is watching. Mexican independence leaders finally lifted the formal prohibition in 1810, nearly 300 years after Cortés imposed it. 300 years. In those same 3 centuries, European agriculture had completely reorganized the Americas around wheat, rice, and European livestock. The infrastructure of food, the markets, the milling systems, the trade routes, all of it had been built around imported crops. Amaranth, even once legal, had no system to return to. It survived in pockets. It fed the poor in villages that had nothing else. It was not a superfood. It was a poor person's food. And poor people's food does not attract investment. By the 20th century, amaranth was functionally invisible to mainstream nutrition science. It was growing in Mexico, in the Andes, in the Himalayas, and in parts of Africa where it had been carried centuries earlier. But it was absent from the tables of anyone with enough wealth to choose something else. Then, in the 1970s, a plant scientist named John Robson at the University of Michigan picked up a handful of seeds and ran them through a nutritional analysis. The results stopped his research team. Complete protein, exceptional mineral content, squalene concentrations that no land plant was supposed to achieve, an amino acid profile superior to wheat, rice, and corn combined. Robson published the data. The Rodale Institute began experimental cultivation. By the early 1980s, amaranth had been quietly rediscovered by Western science and described in peer-reviewed literature as one of the most promising underutilized crops in the world. NASA added it to its short list of crops for long-duration space missions. The list was not long. None of this translated into a mainstream food system. The grain that had rebuilt civilizations after every catastrophe for 6.5 millennia was suddenly being sold in small bags at health food stores, marketed to people who already ate well, priced at $12 a pound as an exotic specialty item. The people who had been eating it in mountain villages for 3 centuries paid pennies for it. The people who rediscovered it in Brooklyn paid enough to make it a luxury. The suppression did not end in 1521, it just changed form. Industrial agriculture has no infrastructure for amaranth. The seeds are small and require specialized harvesting equipment. The plant matures unevenly across a single crop. Standard grain mills cannot process it without modification. There is no commodity pricing system, no government subsidy program, no standardized seed supply chain. What Cortés eliminated with fire, the modern food system eliminates with indifference. But there are no death penalties for growing it today. You can buy a seed packet at any garden center. You can grow it in a container on a balcony. A single plant will produce more seeds than you can eat in a season, and each one carries the complete nutritional profile that the UN called superior to every grain you are currently eating. It grows in poor soil. It tolerates drought. It needs no fertilizer. It comes back from almost nothing. The Aztecs called it huautli. The Inca called it kiwicha. In the Himalayas, they called it grain sent by God. In the Caribbean, the leaves still cook in pots under a name that has survived 5 centuries of forgetting. In most of the world right now, it is still called a weed. In 1521, Hernán Cortés looked at a food that had sustained civilization for 6.5 millennia, decided it looked too dangerous to allow, and burned it. 5 centuries later, the most nutritious grain on earth is sold by the ounce to people wealthy enough to afford it, while the agricultural system that could bring it to everyone has never been built. The ban worked, not because the plant disappeared, because the knowledge did. But that knowledge does not have to stay buried. A seed packet costs less than a cup of coffee. The plant grows in the worst soil in your garden. It produces more protein per square foot than anything else you can plant. It feeds itself, season after season, from its own dropped seeds. Every civilization that found it built something with it. The ones that lost it had it taken. You know what it is now. If this vault changed how you see the history of your food, do not let this knowledge disappear again. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the notification bell. Every like and every share bypasses the algorithm to preserve what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.